Greetings, everyone. Joining me on today's Next Gen North podcast is Charlie King. Charlie is a Territory sporting icon and advocate against domestic and family violence and was awarded an Order of Australia Medal for his service to broadcast media and the Indigenous community. In this episode, Charlie takes us through his early life in Alice Springs, his journey through sports broadcasting, and his No More campaign in the fight against domestic and family violence. We hope you enjoy this episode. All right, well, Charlie King, thanks for joining us on the Next Gen North podcast.
Thanks for asking, Stu. Nice to be here.
So my first memories of you go back to the 1990s, watching you. So I grew up in both Darwin and Tennant Creek, and watching you on the ABC doing the game. I think it was the game of the week on Sunday mornings back in those days. Was sport always a part of your life growing up, like it was for mine?
Well, it sort of was. I mean, I lived in Quorn in the Flinders Ranges in South Australia when I was a young fellow, and I first started playing footy down there. And we used to, the big boys would be playing. We were in like third grade or something, and we'd stand outside the fence. And if the ball came over the fence, we'd chase it down and we'd try to kick it back over. And of course, we couldn't. But I just got really fascinated. And I remember going to the library to get a book, and there was a photo there, and it had this tall blonde guy taking this incredible high mark over the top of a pack, and I didn't realise that one day I would meet him, and I got a chance to actually meet him and talked about his days of playing footy. He was a champion St Kilda player. But footy was cricket too. I played cricket, and I was probably better cricketer than I was a footballer, though, I must say.
Yeah. Sorry, just move that mic a little bit closer if you don't mind. So, where were you born originally? Where did you come from?
Yeah, born in Alice Springs, 1951, at the Alice Springs Hospital. Got a twin sister. We were both born there. Dad often told stories about us. He'd put us on display when he'd had a few drinks and friends around. He'd say, "Get Charlie and Cheryl and bring them out." And he'd say, "These are my twins." And they were the first pigeon pair of twins ever born in the Alice Springs Hospital. I don't know whether that was true or not.
Yep.
Never bothered to check it out. But I do have memories of living in Alice Springs as a child. I think we stayed there until I was about 5 years of age, and
Right.
Dad was working on the railway line, and the further he went down, the more difficult it was for him to come back. So we went to the other end of the railway line, which was Port Augusta.
Wow.
And thought we could get some accommodation there, but we had a big family. I think there were 10 children in the family by then.
Yeah.
So we went to Quorn, which was just on the other side of the Flinders Ranges, and got an old farmhouse, and we lived there until we got to finish grade 10, and then we came back to Alice Springs. But I do remember climbing on my brother's motorbike when I was a little boy, because it had a little bantam rooster on the side of the petrol tank, and I wanted for some reason to get my hands on it, and I fell off there and banged my head on the ground. I do remember that happening. But it's, some pleasant memories too of good things, spending time with my big sisters who were like aunties to me, and them spoiling me. And as Mum always said, because I had two brothers who were much older than me, and she'd always say, "Those two are Dad's, this one's mine."
Yeah.
Which always made me feel special.
So you had quite a large family. What was that dynamic like? Was it a battle for Mum and Dad's attention in those days?
Well, it's almost like in separate groups.
Right.
Like that first group, they were like adults when we were children, so we sort of saw them more as you'd see an auntie or an uncle.
Yep.
But there were 11 of us, and I'm number 9, so I've got 2 younger sisters than me, but we're a pretty big family. And I always say to people, we've got 8 sisters. I've got 8 sisters and 2 brothers, so don't criticise me in the street, because you're probably talking to a relative through my sister's name, who was to be a married name, so you wouldn't even know. But anyway, we were a committed family. We struggled. We weren't, we certainly didn't have a lot of money, but we struggled. But we lived on a farm, and we did all the farm things, So it was still, I have really good memories of living in a little place called Quorn. I go back from time to time.
Yeah, I've heard of Quorn. I actually went to university down in Adelaide, so I remember hearing people heading to Quorn for various work experience and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But, so big family, small town. Can you tell us about your parents and how they met? Was it a typical Territory story, or was it something sort of out of the ordinary?
Well, probably typical for the circles that I hang around now.
Yep.
My mum was a Gurindji woman from Limbunya Station. Her father was a white policeman who went on to be Commissioner of Police in South Australia.
Wow.
And Dad came from a well-to-do family in Corowa on the River Murray, where he was a pretty handy bike rider. And you're probably wondering now, and listeners are as well, how did these two meet, given one's at Limbunya and one's down in Victoria?
Yep.
But he did get an opportunity to ride a newly invented bike back in the 1920s called the Malvern Star, which was invented by a guy called Bruce Small, who went on to be the Mayor of the Gold Coast and is remembered for having opened up the Gold Coast to make it the tourist mecca that it is. So he asked Dad whether he'd be interested in riding the bike around Australia. And Dad was, I think he was about 18 or 19, and he was a bike rider with the Sandringham Bike Club at the time. And so he said yes, he'd do it, and he got together with his friend Basil Nixon, and they took off from, Basil took off from Melbourne, met Dad at Corowa, and then they rode on up to Brisbane, across to Longreach, and then headed north. And just when they got south of where Catherine is now, where the Marramboy police station is, Basil fell off his bike, and unbeknownst to Dad, he had a pistol in his pocket. He was scared of Aboriginal people. He'd heard that they were cannibals and they might be wanting to chop his head off. But he fell off. Anyway, the gun went off and shot him through the leg, and so he had a bullet in his leg. And so he rode from where Marramboy police station is all the way to Darwin with the bullet still in his leg. Oh, wow. And then when he got here, it had turned gangrenous, and they couldn't treat him here, so they sent him back on a ship back to Melbourne. And Dad was stuck here with two bikes and himself, and I still know that the place where he was, there was an old hotel called the Terminus, which is about where Brown's Mart is, in that area there. Yep. And Dad, people would tell stories about Dad sitting out in the front there with a little sign saying, "Want to join me on my ride around Australia?" But Darwin people were too smart for that. They weren't going to have a bar of it. So he actually got stuck here in Darwin. Yep. And of course he had to make some money, so he started work, and they were building around, doing road construction around Ludmilla, where the Ludmilla School is now. Yep. And it was a pretty rocky sort of place, so he got some work there, and he got sunstruck and was actually in hospital in a coma for a while. Meanwhile, my mum had been removed from her family at Limbunya Station by welfare workers at the time, her and her sister, my auntie Maggie, and their cousin Daisy Ruddick, who Daisy well known in the Territory. Right. And they were brought to the Carlin compound, which is at the top of Smith Street, Mitchell Street, in that area there overlooking Cullen Bay, and put in the compound. And she stayed there. She was 8 years of age, but it must have been a terrible time for her because they separated her from her sister because they didn't want them to speak their language. Right. So she lost her language. She could only speak English, and she wasn't allowed to speak her language until she left there when she was 18. So she'd been there 10 years without speaking, and of course she had no one to talk the language to. So she was there, and when she turned 18, they found her a job at the hospital as a domestic. And on this particular day, she was asked whether she'd do a shift for one of the other women who didn't turn up on the day, wasn't well. Yep. And so Mum decided at the last minute that she would. She didn't know that it was going to be like the biggest moment of her life, so she actually went into the room, and she was cleaning the room, and lying in the bed suffering from sunstroke and in a coma is my dad. And so he wakes up and starts looking at her, and he sees her there, and he says, and Mum poo-pooed this, what he said, but he said, "I opened my eyes, I saw this lady standing there dressed in white. I thought it was an angel, and I thought, heavens, I've gone to heaven, and all the angels are Aboriginal people." Yeah. But Mum says he wouldn't think that, and he always said, "What would you know what I was thinking?" So anyway, so they met each other, and as was the rules in those days, if he wanted to spend any time with her or was interested in her and needed to get to know her more, he had to get permission to do it. And it was almost like a job application that you had to write out. So he'd write out this request to Dr. Cook, who was a protector of Aboriginal people at that time, and he'd write all the work that he'd actually done and why he should be allowed to take her to the pictures.
Yeah.
So he got permission to do that. So they went to the Star, in the Star Village where the old cinema used to be.
Right.
It's not there anymore, obviously, but it was an old cinema. And he says it was a great time, and he met Mum and he really got to like her. And she'd again poo-pooed it. She said, "We went to the movies together. He fell asleep and he woke up at the end of it, and then we come home." So anyway, you get different stories coming back, but they had a great relationship. They had a marriage that lasted more than 50 years.
Wow.
They lived in Darwin. They lived out at Howard Springs in a home that Dad built himself with an axe and a saw, chopping down bloodwood trees and paperbark trees for the saplings in the ceiling. And they lived there, and she passed away in 1982, and he stopped living from that day. And he would sit down on his haunches, he'd roll a cigarette, and you just couldn't talk to him. He just wanted to be alone in his thoughts. And I don't think, and when I think back, I think we should have done more for him, but my sister reached out and helped him a lot. My twin sister, Cheryl, she looked after him during those times, but he passed away 6 months to the day after she died. So they're buried alongside each other in the cemetery out at McMillan's Road, and we go there from time to time, and it's got their names up. And Mum's, we gave her right Aboriginal name, which was Ningardi.
Right.
They actually changed her name to Ruby Jane Smith. I don't know how creative they were, but that's what they went with. She was Ningardi, and that's on her tombstone. And John Richard King lying next to her. And I used to take him to visit her grave from time to time, and it had a big R written on the concrete next to it. And I didn't know whether I should tell him that we'd reserved that plot for him. And now I think we probably should have. We should have, but we didn't. And
he might have known.
Yeah, he probably would have worked it out, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, so but their lives were amazing. I mean, pity they're not here. They could sit here and tell you a fascinating story about all they did, because before he got sunstruck, he actually went driving trucks, and he got a job in Alice Springs driving the road train, which is the big Leyland truck, which is in the Road Transport Hall of Fame.
Right.
It's a big Leyland truck. Had about 6 trailers on the back, and so he drove that through the territory, all over the territory, delivering goods to Vesties stations and all those sorts of things. So there'd be him and his co-driver, and they'd have to, if they come to a river that they couldn't get across, they'd have to unload it, drive the truck across, and then carry all the stuff. I mean, it was hard work, and he did it for years before he met Mum. But then he met Mum, and then he got some more work doing other work. But he was a homemade mechanic. There's nothing he couldn't fix. He used to always say this incredible thing, Stuart. He'd say, "Oh, I don't know what we're going to do. We can't fix it," and then he'd fix it. And we knew that as kids. I don't know what he said. If he said he couldn't do it, he would. Yeah. He would do it. But he's an incredible man, and I'm very proud of him now. And I didn't tell him at the time that I was proud, and I didn't try to encourage him to talk more about his young life.
Right.
But I asked him, would he write something down, and he wrote it down. And he's got 260 pages of his life in the Territory. And we did a booklet up on it, but we've now got a friend of ours looking at how she can turn it into a proper book with, more of the stories expanded. Like he would say, I drove the Leyland truck. Well, she could say the story of the Leyland truck. Right. What's a Leyland truck doing in Alice Springs, basically?
Yep.
Yeah, so their story is fascinating, and I miss them a lot. And I'm always thinking, my daughters, and my youngest daughter, Emma, she says to me so often, "Oh, I wish I could have talked to your mum and dad, to my grandma and grandpa."
Yep.
But of course, it doesn't happen. But if you're listening now and you've got a mum and dad, tell them you love them, talk to them about their lives. They want to talk about it, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure they were proud of you, Charlie, and I'm sure they knew that you were proud of them. 50 years is a hell of an accomplishment. And coincidentally, my parents have just ticked over 50 years. They had their anniversary on the weekend. So I think, in the modern era, you're not going to see as many 50-year wedding anniversaries.
I agree. I don't think we will.
Nah. But how far did your father actually travel to meet your mum in the end?
It was about, I think it was about 3,600 kilometres he'd ridden to get to Darwin from Melbourne or from Corowa. And I always say when people talk about it, I say, well, you know, Julius Caesar travelled from Rome to Egypt to meet Cleopatra, and he only travelled 2,000 kilometres. So Dad travelled further than he did.
So he's got Caesar's got nothing on him, I guess.
No.
Yeah. So then your journey to Darwin. So did you come from, was it Corowa or was it Corn?
Corn.
To Darwin?
Yeah.
And what sort of timeline did that look like?
I was I'd finished year 10 at school, so I was about 16 years of age, and Mum had been struggling and Dad had been struggling to get good, like high-paying work, because the other thing that was happening is as our sisters got older and had children, they worked and Mum had to look after their kids. So the house was full of us, you know. We were everywhere, and so Dad needed to earn more money than what he was getting in South Australia. So he actually got a job back in Darwin.
Yep.
So he came back here and we stayed down there, and he'd send down money every fortnight.
Right.
I don't know how it worked, but there was always food on the table, you know, and Mum would make do with whatever we had to make it stretch for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't feel as though we missed out on too much in Corn, but the day came where we had to pack up and leave Corn and head back to Alice Springs, which is the most exciting time. We got on the Gann in Port Augusta and we rode all the way off, and I remember jumping off at Lee Creek to have a look around, and the train was just about ready to go again, and I'm running and they're yelling out to me to jump back on the train again, and Mum said, "Don't do that. Don't get off the train without telling us." So it was a long ride up to Alice Springs, and we arrived in Alice Springs in 1965, and we stayed there for just a little over a year, like 18 months, when Mum and Dad decided they wanted to move further up to Darwin, because she'd spent time here, as I'd said before, in the Carlin compound, and she had lots of people that she knew here.
Yeah.
So they packed up and they left me in Corn, in Alice Springs, because I was doing a mechanics apprenticeship.
Okay.
At Sutton's Motors. Hello, people at Sutton's Motors. Thanks for looking after me. So I worked there for a while, and a strange thing happened. I used to go along to the dances that were held every couple of weeks at the YMCA or different places, and I loved it. And this is a time of the Beatles, people will know, in the 60s.
Right.
And I loved it, and I'd listen, and I'd go and sit, not me for dancing with anybody. I wanted to watch the band and the drummer in particular. I always thought I one day wanted to be Ringo Starr. So I'd sit there and I'd copy them beating the drums on the stage while I was watching them. And anyway, an amazing thing happened one day when the Todd River flooded and the band had a gig that they were to play, and the drummer got stuck on the east side, the other side of the river, and the rest of the band was on this side. And so they were calling him to come across the river. He says, "Oh, no, I don't, it'll wash my car off the causeway." And in the end, they convinced him to do it, and of course it did. Washed his car off the causeway. The door flew open on the car and some of his drums floated out, and he was so angry, and he had to swim to get across, and he got out and he said to them, "I'll never play for you guys again, you know, you made me lose my car and my drums and whatever." And so here they are with a gig, in musical terms, like is to play this session, and they wasn't sure what they were going to do. And then one of the guitarists went and said, "The guy standing behind us, that Aboriginal guy, me, he comes along and he plays the drums on the stage. Yeah. Why don't we ask him to sit in?" And so I didn't have any drums to sit in with. I didn't have anything at all that was musical except a love of it. Yeah. But they went and asked my mum, and she said, you know, would you mind if he come and played in the band? And so she's in front of them, she said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely." And so I did it. So I'm sitting on the stage, having never played the drums, a full set of drums in my life before, sitting on the stage at a full set of drums with the light shining down on me. And the first song we played was Apache, which is an instrumental that the Shadows played. Yep. And it starts off with that drum, boom, 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 boom. And so I'm doing that, and I'm thinking, if I could get my hands free, I'd pinch myself. This is not real. People were screaming. It was the Beatles era. Yep. people were yelling out and carrying on. I just thought it amazing. And of course, at the break when we went outside, our car, like the band's car was there, and it's got stuff written on lipstick on the windscreen and all these little notes and all sorts of things. And all of a sudden we're musicians and we're, you know, being adored by people. It was an amazing time. I really enjoyed it, and I stuck it out for nearly a year and then decided I had to come up to Darwin, and that's another story to tell because so much happened that got me here, but I got here anyway.
Well, just before we get to Darwin, so passing back through Alice Springs and just circling back to your mum, was that an opportunity for her to sort of rekindle her roots, and, you know, was she able to maintain any of her language and culture and that sort of thing as she passed back through Alice Springs?
Yeah, could you mention that? Because that's really important part of the story is she was released, for want of a better word, from the Carlin compound when she was 18. And Dad did what he wasn't supposed to do, so he had to apply to marry her. And in it wasn't written specifically, but it suggested that he shouldn't go back to her country.
Right.
And that's exactly what he did. It must have been the Irish in him that he did exactly what he wasn't supposed to do.
Yep.
So they got married, spent their honeymoon, their wedding night at the Darwin Hotel in Mitchell Street, and then got on the train and went down to Katherine. They got 3 horses, and they rode from Katherine to Limbunya Station. Took them about 4 or 5 days to get to Limbunya.
Can you just tell us where Limbunya is?
Well, Limbunya's over near the Western Australian border, so it's closer to the Western Australian border than in the Territory. So it's about 100 kilometres southeast of Kalkarinji, which is Wave Hill. Wave Hill. But it's on Gurindji country, and that's where she was removed from. And it was a very sad story how that all happened. But what was significant was when she was removed as an 8-year-old, 3 horses came in from the east to pick her and her cousin and her sister up as well. When Dad and Mum went back there, they rode 3 horses and did exactly the same, rode in from the east.
Right.
But what was waiting for them was the shock of Dad's life, of Mum's life rather. She could not believe it. So they arrived there, and so the Gurindji people see them coming and they welcome them, and then Mum, there's this moment where she meets her mother, whose name she would never mention. She always just called her Tom. She said that's the name they gave her because she was such a hard worker.
Right.
But I think it was a name, so they didn't have to say her name after she passed away.
That's a cultural...
Yeah, just called her Tom.
Yep.
And so she was introduced to Dad, and she said, "I know Kingy." And Mum, "What?" And she said, "I know Kingy." And Mum said, "How?" And she said, "He come here with the truck with the Vestige stuff on it."
Wow.
Many years before.
Yeah.
So it's incredible. These 2 people have this unbelievable chance of meeting, then get married, and then go back to her home country like you're not supposed to do. And there's his mother, who knows the bride, who knows knows Dad, and it was an amazing moment.
Yeah, wow.
I always found it hard to tell that story. I tell it now better than I've ever told it before, but thanks for bringing it back because I'd skipped past that.
That's all right. So you made your way then to Darwin. You know, what was your first impressions of Darwin? I'm assuming you hadn't been there before by that stage?
Never. And, I come from Alice Springs, so I'd been there nearly 2 years, and the Red Santa and whatever. It was September. It was one of the wettest, February rather, one of the wettest Februaries of all time. Right. It was 66 in February, which is, people who know, we changed to decimal currency on the 14th of February 1966. Okay. During that time I was travelling up to Darwin. I'd hitchhiked up to Darwin. The reason I'd hitchhiked up to Darwin is I'd saved my money to get on the bus, and I was staying at a guest house, and I hid the money under my mattress in the hope that I wouldn't lose it or anything. Yeah. And of course I come back and someone's stolen it. So I didn't have any money, and so I'm stuck. And so I hitchhiked, went north with a friend of mine, and we hitchhiked. Took us 3 days. Guy picked us up, gave us a ride. We got as far as Tennant Creek, and then 3 Ways. We went into 3 Ways. I walk into Three Ways with no money. We're living on vitamin pills. That's all we had. And there's a guy sitting at the counter at the bar, and I see him in the reflection in the mirror, but I wasn't quite sure that I knew him, although he looked familiar. And so I got some water and whatever, and then I turned to walk out, and he turned around and he said, "What are you doing, Charlie?" And it was my brother, Reg.
Wow.
I could not believe it. He was sitting there. He'd been driving a bulldozer down from Darwin, clearing underneath the telegraph lines, and he'd got as far as he was going. He turned around, heading back to Darwin. And so he said, "Jump in with us." So the friend and I jumped in with him, and we rode in style back. And I could just tell you just a side story. As soon as we left Three Ways, he had a rifle underneath the front seats of the car, and he stopped. And he said, "Lean back," and I leaned back, and he leaned across in front of me, and he pulled the trigger, and he said, "Got him." And because I didn't see a thing, he said, "Got him." I said, "What is it?" So we went over, and it was a big bush turkey. Anyway, he stopped for the night and lit a fire and cooked it up. And I got to tell you, Stuart, it's the best meal I've ever had in my life. He did a great job. But anyway, we got to Darwin then, and I arrived here, and the cane grass was like 2 metres tall down around Adelaide River, and I couldn't believe it. I said, "This place is heaven, like it's amazing. Bright green with everything and a bit of rain falling." I thought, wow, this is quite amazing. And I fell in love with Darwin from the moment I experienced the atmosphere and just the feeling, it was just fantastic. And I said, this is going to be my home. And I've never left. I've been here since 1966, and I still love it. And when that wet season comes and the big cane grass grows and that smell comes back again, it's just glorious place to be.
So when you arrived, had you finished your mechanical trade, or so what did you do? How did you gather yourself? You had no money.
Yeah, I was naughty, really. I mean, I was supposed to do an apprenticeship, and I pulled out of it because I was in the band now, making money playing in the band. And of course I didn't tell Mum and Dad about that. And so when I left, I then had to tell them when I got here. And even worse, while I was there, I put a couple of tattoos on my arm, and I wore a long sleeve shirt for about 2 months when I was back, and I didn't want Dad to see it. And then one day he saw it, and he cut me with the most devastating comment. He looked at me and he said, "If that is what I think it is, you're sillier than what I thought you were." Got up and walked outside. So, oh my gosh. But at least the cat was out of the bag. He knew. I knew it. But it was good to be here, and I looked for work straight away. But while I was working in Alice Springs, I also got some work working in the brickyard, making bricks, because I could knock off early and go to band practice and whatever. They were pretty good. They paid you by the hour. You didn't work a full day. You worked whatever hours you wanted to work. And so I was a hard worker, and I'd done lots of it. And so I got to Darwin, and there was a job going. Mum said, you've got to get a job and whatever. And there was a job going at the Nightcliff supermarket, which is still there, in where the Nightcliff markets are. It's that little supermarket on the corner.
Wow.
Mr. Jackson was the boss. I got the job, and I remember the second day my job was to sort out all the potatoes because some of them had gone rotten and had maggots in them. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting out the back door sorting these potatoes out, and I often walk past there now, and I always take my daughter there and say, I sat right there back in 1966 sorting out these rotten potatoes. Anyway, he took a shine to me, did Mr. Jackson, called me in after about a week and said, "I like the way you work, young fellow." And I said, "Oh, thank you very much," because I'm used to hard work, and this was like stacking shelves, which I have no problem doing. He said, "I think you got a future here." He said, "If you put in good 10 years, he said you could even get a job as maybe even an assistant storeman or something." And right at that moment I said, I don't want to do this. This is not for me.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I gave notice or anything. I just, as people did at that time, I just simply didn't go back. And so I was looking for some more work to do, more physical work. And I got an opportunity. There were some houses being built in Stuart Park, and they dug the footings for it, but they didn't dig them deep enough. So there was like a little contract arrangement. There was 5 houses. All you had to dig the footings down an extra, whatever it was, 10 centimetres or whatever. And so I said to the guy, I'd like to do that. He said, well, you can do it. Start tomorrow. So we lived in Ryland Road, so I went home to Ryland Road. I didn't have a car, but I picked up a crowbar and a shovel, and I walked from Ryland Road to Stuart Park and started work. And every night I'd bury the crowbar and the shovel, cover it up, and then come back to work the next day. But I liked that hard work, and it was good out in the sun, shirt off, just a pair of shorts on. I used to love it. It was good.
So was Darwin a fairly vibrant place in those days? When you arrived, was it easy to get work? Was it easy to sort of make your way, or was it a tough sort of environment?
No, it was very easy. We just walked around. We would walk around Bishop Street, where all the businesses were, and we'd just go in and say we're looking for work. And Burnsville run a big business there. They were building supplies and cement and all those sorts of things, and they'd put on workers when the cement boats came to Darwin, and you'd have to unload them because they'd be in slings, and you'd have to stack them in a big stack. And so I got some work there, and I spent 7 years working there and worked myself up to be the foreman. Drove a forklift, unloading timber and doing all those sorts of things, and met some wonderful people and got to know lots of Greek men. And I got to say they had to lend to me a little bit, because they called me a name that I did. They'd call me Mavro, which I didn't realise what it meant. And they said, well, I said, what's it mean? They said, it means friend. I said, oh, thank you. So Mavro. And then later on I told another Greek one, they said, that actually means black. It's the word that means black.
They were playing a trick on you.
They were playing a trick on me, but they were doing it in a nice way. And no one was being offensive about it. It was just fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I worked at Burnsville for 7 years, and came to a sad end eventually, where it just didn't work out for me. But it gave me an opportunity to do some work that was a real big body of work that gave me an opportunity to deal with things that I'd been feeling about issues. It was a great opportunity that arrived as a result of that sad, bad passing from Burnsville.
So it sounds like Darwin was, as much of a melting pot then as it is now. Was that your experience? Do you think Darwin's still that sort of, diverse melting pot that's, provides different perspectives on life and, different views on the world?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. My mum said to us when she was telling us when we were in Alice Springs, we're going to go to Darwin, you will be surprised about how many Aboriginal people hold really important jobs. She says there's doctors, there's lawyers, there's people who own the service station. They're Aboriginal people.
Right.
So she had probably a grander view of it than the rest of us had. But to us, it just seemed like how good will this place be,
Yeah.
So my arrival in Darwin was delayed because I stayed on in Alice. But by the time I got here, my sisters had settled down well. I mean, they used to have 5 or 6 hotels, and each one would have a late night. There'd be Wednesday night at the Darwin Hotel, Thursday night at Fanny Bay, Friday night at the Dolphin, which is on Bagot Road where Jape is, and Saturday night at the Sea Breeze, which is where the pier is now, down at Nightcliff. Each one of those would hold their own late night, and everyone would pack up there. And I mean, there were bad things that happened. There were fights and arguments sometimes, but people used to, they'd really get together and they all knew each other, and it was fantastic.
So the sporting vibe of Darwin in those days. So you're an icon of Territory sport. How did your love of sport come about, and did Darwin sort of contribute to that, or was it already well established before you got there?
Well, I played football and cricket when I was in Quorn, and actually got a chance to go away to Adelaide to play for the country team versus the city team in football and in cricket. And so when I got to Darwin, I didn't get involved in sport immediately because I wanted to learn to drive bulldozers because my brothers were driving bulldozers. So I did a lot of work with them driving the bulldozers, and I was out of town obviously and couldn't go to training, work long hours. But eventually I got a chance to play Australian rules football and cricket, which I really enjoyed doing it. And I was never great at it, but one of the things that did give me an opportunity was I used to love the commentary, listening to it, and the way people used to commentate, and I could tell the difference between race callers and people calling the footy, because the race callers would get this like put-it-em sort of call rhythm going.
Yep.
And footballers would do all these fill-in bits while the person's got possession and then got rid of it.
Yep.
And then what do you say now while the ball's in the air? That's the bit I used to listen to, and I thought it was really good. And so I started trying to emulate it. So I'd go to the footy and we'd sit on the hill, and some of my friends would come along and sit around, and I'd make out to call it. I'd say, kicks it to Bobby Skilton, runs into an open goal and kicks another one, and they'd say, no, that can't be Bobby Skilton, he's too big. He's too big to be Bobby Skilton. And fortunately for me, an ABC broadcaster walked past and listened to me mucking around with it.
Wow.
And
so you got discovered.
Yeah, so he came to me, he said, you should come in and put your voice down. You've got a good sounding voice, and, we could help you learn to do commentary, and might be a new career for you. And I said I would, but of course I didn't think I could possibly do it, so I didn't do it. And then I run into a person in Smith Street who asked me whether I'd voice a tuberculosis ad about TB. And because this had never ever happened to me before, and I didn't even know what TB was, And I think at first I thought it was TV, television. But Dr. Krause, her name was Vicky Krause. I wonder if she's still around. She probably still is. I'd love to.
I feel like I've heard that name.
Yeah. So it was her that asked me whether I'd do it, and eventually I got encouraged to do it, and I went in, I put my voice down at the ABC of this tuberculosis ad, and the ABC liked it, and so they come back to me again and said, you really need to come in. We've now got your voice. We know what it sounds like. We can work with you. So in the end, I just did it. It's like jumping off the cliff. You just got to do it, I said, I'll regret it if I don't do it. So I went in and I got offered the job to be not a commentator, but to be a sports reporter part-time.
Okay.
So I could keep my day job.
Yep.
And on the weekends, just come into the ABC and do the sports, like a sports report. Dave Lennon, who I'm forever grateful for, was the sport reporter who encouraged me to do it, and Kevin Norton, whom a lot of people will know was his sidekick. They did this sports show together, and so they said, you come in and what you can be the boxing correspondent, and so they'd get the printout off the telex of all the boxing bouts that were held, and so I had to read them, and I'd be sitting there with them trying to read them and doing whatever, and so I started then, and I'd just come in on weekends and do that it started at just Saturdays, and then it became Sundays as well. So for a lot of my life, I was working 7 days a week, and I really enjoyed it, and I got more confident as the time went by. And I remember later on, I was filling in for the reporter who used to do a 2-minute sports report after the news, top of the clock news, so 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. They'd have 5 minutes of news and then 2 minutes for sport. And so you'd have to fill the 2 minutes, but you couldn't do a minute and a half. It had to be 2 minutes, so you had to time it exactly.
Right.
So as soon as you did the first one, you'd have to get the next lot ready, and you'd have to go and time it in another studio. So I remember doing it once, and then they said to me, always have a spare piece ready in case you talk faster than you think you are, and you're going to have 20 seconds left.
Yep.
Have something you can fill with.
Right.
And so I remember this day having something ready, and I'm reading it, and I think their suggestion that if you do something fast actually got into my brain and actually did it faster than I did. And all of a sudden I got 20 seconds left to fill, and you can't have dead air for 20 seconds.
Yep.
So I had a tennis score, which I got. Davis Cup, Australia were playing Italy, I think, in the Davis Cup. And Australia were leading 2-0, which was like a fantastic performance from them. Mm-hmm. It's pretty good. And I said, and turning to tennis, good news coming through from the Davis Cup, Australia are leading Italy 2-0. And of course everyone just went, it was hilarious for them all, and they made such fun of it, but it got me known, and people wouldn't forget it. They'd say, here he come, 2-0, you know. So it was all fun, but it was good. And look, the ABC are a great place to work with. They attract really good people, you know. I mean, I celebrated my 35th year just a couple of weeks ago.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And they they said nice things, but they are nice people. They attract nice people, because if you're not a nice person, you probably won't fit in at the ABC. So good people there. They don't steal from each other. They don't backstab people. Everyone reaches out and they work as a team, and they do a fantastic job. And I'm proud to have spent 35 years with still a couple at least to go.
Yep.
But I really enjoy it.
Fantastic. Well, we just had Richard Creswick on discussing his latest book that commemorates the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy, and he spoke really well, and he read some excerpts from his book and it was quite moving. So I think that sort of talks to what you're saying now.
Yeah, it was a great place, and I know Richard well, and of course I have experience with Cyclone Tracy, because where we're doing this podcast is where my sister stayed during Cyclone Tracy. She didn't get it got damaged, got quite badly damaged, but she was okay and her children were okay. But I couldn't talk about Cyclone Tracy for years and years and years after, because it was very traumatic for me and for our family. And I remember when the museum had the cyclone room, I wouldn't go in. And then the first day I went in, it just reduced me to tears. Just that noise, I remember it so much, so vividly. It's just quite extraordinary.
Well, Richard actually wanted us to put we showed a video during that podcast, and he actually wanted us to put a bit of a warning on before, because they play the alarm.
Yeah.
And it's a ominous sounding noise on its own, without the actual connotation of tying it to a cyclone. So it just, there's small things, well, not small things, but things that just trigger those sorts of emotions still in people.
And the only way I was able to talk about it was they had some anniversary, and I was invited to be one of the Share Your Story people, and I turned it into like a funny thing rather than, because you normally do it from the heart, and it reduces you to tears, and it's a blubbering mess, and you don't make
if you don't laugh,
sense.
you cry, sort of
thing.
thing.
Yeah. So I made it a story about my missing guitar that had got missing, and kept introducing it into the story that I was telling about Cyclone Tracy, and finished by saying that, so if anyone sees that white guitar which has got Mick Jagger's lips on it, that's my guitar and I want it back. And that was years after Cyclone Tracy, and people all had a little laugh about that, because it was like a bit of a funny thing,
Bit of levity to break it up a bit.
Yeah, allowed me to talk about it. And then from then on I was able to tell my story about Cyclone Tracy.
Your progression from being a sports, I guess, do they call it beat writer back in those days, to be, being the anchor for the NTFL, how did that sort of progression come about, where you were a sports writer, and then you sort of made that role your own as the NTFL? Yeah.
It's a natural progression, I think, because you start off as a casual sport reporter. Most sport reporters start off as casuals anyway, and they work their way through it over the years. And so it got more and more. We started to cover more NTFL footy matches, and so Dave Lennon would be in charge of organising it, and he'd roster me on, and I'd go along and start off as doing some special comments, and then eventually I got a chance to call the match, and I think I went on to call maybe 700 matches for the ABC, 20 years calling on television with the ABC, and I didn't think that at the first live call that I was doing that there was going to be that many in front of me, but I really enjoyed it. And I mean, thinking back and listening to my call now to what they've got now, there's chalk and cheese. There's no similarities at all, and because they get such rhythm in their calls now,
right.
and the commentators have such information, and they're very accurate. They call every single player, and every time they do a match, they sit down after and go back over it and make notes together, and with the producer. So three of them sit down and run through it until they get to a level where they don't need to do that. But I've just come back from spending some time in Melbourne, sitting in the commentary box during the Indigenous round match between Essendon and Richmond, and got a chance to offer some comments from the boundary and whatever. But they're brilliant callers these days, and and people might not understand, but it's like music to my ears. I listen to it and I love it, and it's just like music for me, and I think they do a fantastic job, and I just wonder where they will be 10 years from now. You know, they'll probably have every player mic'd up and they'll be able to get their comments and whatever. But, gee, it's been a lifetime of opportunities and being able to develop them and continue to do it and do more and more of it. But it was really good. And I remember working with some wonderful people. I mean, I want to mention one, if I can, Ian Butterworth worked with me for 14 years as a co-commentator and producer. Butters,
yeah.
You know him from cricket,
obviously. I think he was involved in junior sport. He was an umpire when I was playing footy, I think, in those days as well. Yeah, so he was always sort of around the traps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a great man, and I really enjoyed working with him, and I learned from him and he learned from me. And I used to tease him because I'd say, I heard Tim Lane, who was my mentor at the ABC, was a brilliant caller. Tim Lane, in the commentary, said about the ruckman, he said, ball up in the middle, Wilson rucks and rows and kicks it forward, and Butters copied it off him, and we'd tease each other about what we would steal from Tim Lane and use it in the commentary. But anyway, yeah, Butters. John Stokes worked for a long time with me as well, passed away now sadly, but he was good to work with and he was funny. I remember one night we had a real session. He talked about a spider. He said, you know, spiders bother me. I said, oh, okay. And then he said, especially when they sit on your face. And then all of a sudden he realised that it had some maybe sexual connotation to it. And then he started laughing. Then I realised that he realised what he'd said. And then both of us were laughing, trying to correct ourselves around it. But he was a good man. And Russell Jeffrey, we did a lot of work with him as well. Anyway, a lot of people we worked with over the years.
Well, you must have seen some amazing players play over the years and, you know, have some amazing memories. Who are some of the best players in your mind to come out of the Territory?
Well, it's interesting. I've got this little notebook in front of me here. That same question. Please. I did a chat on National ABC Radio last week when they were in town.
Okay.
And they asked me to give them my 5 top players that I mentioned. So I have it written in front of me.
Great.
So number 5, Darryl White.
Yep.
Who played for Darwin, played for Rovers and played for Pioneers. He's a brilliant player.
Amazing.
Johnny Bubba Ty.
My dad always mentions Bubba Ty to me.
Yeah. Brilliant player, played for Darwin and Nightcliff. Joe Davey, they called him the Flying Five. He used to wear number 5. He's a brilliant player.
Yep.
Russell Jeffrey, who I thought was just amazing. He's the only Territory player to ever don the big V Guernsey for Victoria. No one's ever done it before or since he did it. And but the best one for me, and a great entertainer, I think, was the Tiwi Islander Benny Vagona. What a fantastic player he was. I loved him, loved the way he played, and he was just magical. He like he was gliding. It never looked like he was working hard. He just seemed to glide, and the field always seemed all of a sudden so much bigger for him, just because he was so good. And I stood him once in a game, and I remember saying to Joe D'Souza, who was the other halfback flanker, we were playing for Wanderers, and we went out in our positions, and I saw that Joe D'Souza was going to be standing on Maurice Rioli, and I said, Joe, you mightn't get a kick today, brother. And he looked up and saw Benny Vagona, and he said, nor you. And both of us got such a lesson just playing on those two guys. They were brilliant. And apologies for Morris, I can't fit him in that top 5 of mine because he didn't play that much footy up here, but those guys didn't. Benny Vagona's my star.
Well, we just had Jardé Vagona, who I think and he mentioned, I
uncle.
Think, nephew of Benny, and my dad also, you know, knows of Benny Vagona and talks fondly about how good he was. You know, I think the way I never saw Benny play, but the way you sort of are describing it is he's like one of those guys where time sort of slows down, like a Pendlebury sort of type, where they just seem like they've got so much more time than everyone else, and you can't figure out how they do it, but they
Why do they do it?
Yeah.
It's a magical thing, I reckon. Yep. Some people have it. You see them occasionally. Pendlebury you mentioned, very good, but even, and some of the great Carlton players, my team, if you like, some of them have got it. But no, there are some great players around. Still love the game.
Yep.
And love cricket as well. You played a bit of cricket, and your dad did.
Yeah, well, I played a little bit of cricket. Actually, when I was a lot younger, I represented the Territory as well in cricket, but just wasn't probably good enough to cut it. You know, at the higher levels. I loved cricket, but yeah, just fell out of love with the game because the games were so long, 80 overs on a weekend, and I was a batsman, and usually opening, so if I nicked off early, I'd be sitting in the bleachers for a day, watching everyone else play cricket. So fell out of love with cricket, and then sort of rekindled my love for Aussie rules. I'm a mad Richmond supporter. So
okay,
yeah.
Can I just share with you a quick cricket story?
Sure, please.
I was down at Borroloola and I played for the Darwin Cricket Club, A-grade cricket club, and they called me and said, you got to come, you got to be here, so you got to come back from Borroloola. So I drove from Borroloola, which is at the bottom of the Gulf of Carpentaria. I drove most of the night and got there in the morning, early hours of the morning. Arrived here late in the morning. Went home, quickly changed into my cricket gear, raced down to the ground to play. When I got there, I was listed to bat at number 5, and whilst I was putting my boots on, or shoes as they were, we lost 2 wickets in 2 balls, and so I'm in on a hat-trick. So I've driven all the way to Borroloola, so I go out to the hat-trick ball, and guess what? Clean bowled.
Oh, wow.
Clean bowl for a duck, and I drove all that way to not even touch the ball.
Yep.
I think it's history. The longest drive for someone to make a duck.
What do they say? It's a funny old game, cricket,
It
and
is.
that's what it does. But commentating's taken you various places. The Olympics and the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
I think you were at the 2006 Commonwealth Games. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then the 2008 Olympics. Can you tell us about what those experiences were like for you?
Well, I remember going to the Olympic Games in Beijing, which was just amazing, and we all went across, but they don't do it anymore because most of it's done off tube now. They don't have to be there, but we, in the days, we'd go there and actually be there. And so the whole team would fly out. We flew out of Sydney. We arrived in Beijing, and at that time there was lots of talk about the smog and how difficult it was going to be. So we arrived there in the morning, and the smog is so you couldn't see any more than 3 or 4 metres in front of yourself. And we're thinking, how are you going to have the games here? This is amazing. But they fired a couple of rockets into the air and actually some way cleaned up the smog. It was just amazing. This was for the opening ceremony.
Wow.
They were able to do it. But to be there, and it was just amazing. And one of my jobs was to commentate on the boxing, and so I remember doing the boxing and sitting there, and I had this incredible moment happen where I remembered when I was waiting to go on air, sitting on my dad's feet in Quorn when I was a little boy, and he's listening to the boxing on radio, and I've even remembered it come into my head so clearly who the 2 people were. Like, this was years before that were boxing. Jimmy Carruthers and Aldo Prevasani. They're fighting for the Australian, I think, lightweight title. Okay. And he's listening to it, and I'm sitting on his shoe, and he's smoking a cigarette, and the room's dark. Every time he takes a puff, the room goes red. But I just remembered it so clearly. And then they crossed to me in the boxing and said, let's go to Charlie at the boxing. And I'm about to open my mouth to say the first couple of words about boxing and how much it meant. I opened my mouth to say it, and nothing came out. Nothing came out. And I was just emotional, and I thought, gosh. And they paused for 8 seconds or something. They said, we'll go back to Charlie in a moment. So, but it was just amazing that was in my head while I'm sitting there thinking about that 1 minute I'm sitting on my dad's feet in Quorn listening to it. Now I'm in Beijing at the Olympic Games about to call the first boxing bout on ABC radio. It was amazing.
So did you gather yourself and?
Yeah, I did actually. It didn't take long. Once you get past it, those emotional things, you click into doing what you're there to do.
Yeah.
But I covered lots of different sports, which was really good. And I was never the best commentator by a long stretch, because some of the guys and women that I work with were amazing. I just don't realise how they would do so much, but they were. And I remember, if I can, Glenn Mitchell, who's one of the great commentators when we were in Melbourne at the Commonwealth Games. You have a day off, you get a rostered day off during the games. So he said, what are you doing today? And I said, oh, I've got the day off. And he said, why don't you come with me to the cycling? I said, oh, yeah, that'd be good. I thought I might learn something about cycling. So I went there with him, and he's calling this race, and it's 2 laps to go, and there's 50 riders in it, and he's doing a really good job. And then there's this breakaway group, you know, and so he's calling these 5 in the breakaway group, so that you think the winner's going to come from there. And all of a sudden, someone makes a break from the pack behind them with a lap to go and just sprints home and catches them right on the line. And he said, and I just couldn't believe what he said, and I can't remember the name of the person that he commentated, but he said, and down the outside, here comes Joel Smith. Smith's going to get there. Smith's going to do what his father did in 1956 when he won the gold medal in Melbourne. I thought, oh my gosh, how could you possibly know? Did he have that for every single rider? There are 50 riders in there.
Yeah.
Did he know a little bit on everyone? He probably did. But just the way he did it, I just looked, what? And he had a piece of paper written in front of him with not much written on it, just a couple of little notes.
It was just all up.
All in the head.
Yeah, amazing.
Fantastic.
So an AFL team in the Territory is back on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts? Is the Territory ready? You know, do we have the population? You know, what are some of the benefits that it could bring to the Territory? What's your sort of your feeling on it?
These are all the things that have to be dealt with. You know, I mean, I was around all those years ago when we looked like we were going to join the South Australian National Football League, the SANFL.
Okay.
It looked like it was almost going to happen, and it seemed the right thing to do, and we were all excited about it. And then it didn't happen, so our hopes got built, and then it all fallen away, and it never really was being discussed that it could happen straight away.
So was that a team in Darwin?
Yeah, and then, well, it was going to be an NT team, and this is another issue that's involved with it. If it's an NT team, it means you've got to play games in Alice Springs as well. So if you want to have a new stadium in Darwin, what's it mean when you go to Alice Springs? You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that's a big issue. I'm not saying it can't happen or it shouldn't happen. I'm excited about the possibility of it.
Yep.
Potentially it can happen. It's going to cost a lot of money. There's a lot of money around. The one thing that will make it happen more than anything is if Australians want it to happen.
Okay.
The AFL will bow to that more than to anything else if that's what has to happen to make it happen.
Yep.
So to sell it, you can sell it to the Territory, and there'll always be lots of questions. You need to sell it to the rest of Australia. Mm-hmm. That's who will make the decision in the end.
Yeah, because I guess there's been that sort of battle that they fought down in Tasmania, right? You know, like I think I'm not sure if the Tasmanian government's got a lot of money, but they had to put a lot of money in for the stadium.
Yeah.
You know, at the AFL's request, or there'd be no team.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of detractors saying that they want that money spent on, you know, social services and things like that. So those are always the battles, aren't they?
Well, same thing here.
Yeah.
You know, like where's the money come from? You know, it's going to take millions. You know, like absolutely. Like I think a stadium's going to cost $750 million to build. You know, and then
staggering amount of money.
And then we're discussing like, well, it might have to be air conditioned, the stadium. You know, well that might cost even more. Meanwhile, grassroots footy being played out in the bush, they don't even have grass. on their track. You know, they're running around, and you know, I think a lot of them have been misdiagnosed with head trauma when they hit the dry ground out in the field, and it's not treated as concussion when everywhere else they've been looked at with kids' gloves, the tiniest bump to the head, you know, and then you got to have a HIA done, you know, head injury assessment, by the way.
Yeah, I think that's just going to become more and more prominent, isn't it? All that head injury stuff and how we manage it. So, well, the AFL takes a very cautionary approach these days,
and so they should.
Yeah,
and they have a duty of care, don't they? And I'm not being a knocker. I'm just trying to be clear about the obstacles in front of us. No one will cheer louder than me if it happens. I would love to be there, and I'll feel great regret that I'm past being able to call the match when it's on, you know. But and it would be great for the Territory. It will be a really good thing, but at what cost?
Yep.
In all honesty, my feelings is it's 10 to 15 years away before we see it eventuate, and I think we've got to be realistic about that.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any involvement with Sir Doug Nicholls' round? Did you get down to Alice Springs at all for the Dockers Demons game?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, I did I was on the boundary.
Yeah, you mentioned it before, the Dreamtime game.
Yeah, I was on the boundary for both of those games, which is always fabulous, and could not believe what happened in Alice Springs and Melbourne kicked the first couple of goals, and
That's
I thought
right.
they looked really good. Max Gawn looked like he was going to have a big game, and it looked like Pickett was going to have a ripper, but then Fremantle just tore them to bits. Absolutely tore them to bits. Won by 92 points in the end, which is the biggest win they've ever had and biggest win over Melbourne. And they had 6,100 people there.
Oh, that's a great turnout.
Talked to Sam Gibson, the CEO of AFLNT, on the flight back, and he said they're very happy with 6,100.
Well, when you consider what's the population of Alice Springs, about 25,000?
25,000, yeah.
And they get 6,000 there, and then the population of Darwin is, 130 in the greater area, and we get 12,
Yeah.
To the Cats Gold Coast game.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, I think. Centralians love their footy.
They do, they love them. Traeger Park is that is the most iconic setting for any sport to be played on Traeger Park.
The backdrop is
with
pretty spectacular.
Yeah, with the McDonnell Ranges, they look fantastic.
Yeah.
And I've been up there and looked back down, and it's breathtaking.
Yeah.
It is absolutely breathtaking. I think one day, hint for the tourist trade, get a what do you call the I'm going to have to cut that out.
That's right.
What do they call them? The chair that takes you up.
Oh, like a chairlift sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think will happen in the future is they'll have a chairlift that'll take you to the top of the ranges to have a look back, and it'll be it's an amazing sight. It really is.
Yeah. I loved playing cricket and footy in Alice Springs, just because of that amazing backdrop you always had.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a couple of floggings in the games in the Territory. So the Gold Coast boys did a number on the Cats, which was a surprise to me, and a lot of the Territory boys actually went really well. In that game as well. What are your thoughts on the Cats in that one?
Oh well, I think the Cats had their problem, didn't they? Because their two key forwards weren't playing, or like Dangerfield wasn't playing either. One of their best, probably arguably the best centreman in the business. I mean, they come to Darwin with 3 guns out against a team that loves playing up here. And the Suns, they were fantastic. They played so well, and they really did the job on Geelong, who left here licking their paws, I reckon, on the way out, thinking, well, what happened? They looked a bit like Melbourne looked against Fremantle on the weekend. So, but the Suns do a really good job, and Melbourne do a really good job as well. When they come in, they're great ambassadors for Australian rules footy. And I know that Melbourne got to Alice Springs 3 days before the match and did a lot of work out in the communities and all those sorts of things. And one of the things that's really special in Alice Springs is they fence off the area in front of the change rooms out on the oval itself once the game's over. So they fence it off about 10 metres back from the doors, and people just crowd, and the people from the bush, they're amazing to see them there. And then out of the room walks Michael Walters, who's an Indigenous player, walks out, and the crowd just goes nuts. These are people from the bush there, and they're getting selfies and signing flags and nurse my baby and sign my arm and whatever. And then Cosy Pickett walks out from the Melbourne room and the same thing. And they signed hundreds. You don't get that down south. You don't get a chance to get that close to these players.
The access.
They walk along the fence, give you a high five or whatever, and maybe they'll sign the odd autograph. But these guys were there for like nearly half an hour. They wouldn't let them go, and there's like 20 deep along those fences. I think it's a lovely thing to see. And I was inside there because I was waiting to talk to Michael Walters and did, but just amazing for them to have that. So, it's lovely. Let's hope it never stops. It's like having kids out on the ground at the end of the match,
having a kick.
Let them do it.
Yeah. You've been a big proponent of the women's game in the Territory. How are you sort of seeing its development, and I guess more broadly in Australia with the AFLW?
Well, I was involved. I know the history of this has been clouded a bit, which is a bit unfortunate that AFLNT don't recognise the history of women's footy because it started long before they got involved with it. So 1999, Banks and University were rivals in the NTFA, the Footballers Association, and every time a match was on, the University supporters sit in one grandstand and the Banks in the other. And when the women would start yelling out stuff to each other, and some of it was really funny and whatever, but out of that came the idea that they should play each other.
Right.
And so they did. And so they asked me to coach them, and I did. So I coached the university team, and they played Banks 3 times, and I think they won the 3 games, which is pretty good. But then they said, well, we want to play more football. You know, women wanted to play more footy. So we started organising women's competition. The NTFL weren't supportive of it. In fact, they were anything but supportive of it. They didn't want to make the ovals available for training and matches and whatever. And so the women trained on, and they got teams going, and they got invited to go down to the national championships in Canberra in 1999, and I took them down. I went down as their coach. They never won a match. They never got anywhere near a match. They never scored anything. But you know what? They were over the moon. They were so proud. It was just incredible. Come back, and then the following year, there was a national championships held in Sydney, and so I took them to Sydney as well. I went to Sydney, and I think Rosanna Breed at the time, DeSantis now, she might have kicked a goal for us in one of the games, which was like winning a premiership. But again, they were just over the moon. They were fantastic, and they come back to Darwin. But they had to get a name for themselves, and I actually made the suggestion to them, maybe you could call yourself the Kites, because it's got Alice Springs players and Darwin players and Catherine players and whatever. Because kites are everywhere, as in the bird of prey.
Right.
And so they call themselves the Kites. And I actually put that suggestion up recently for when an AFL team and this 20th licence might become available. And some people like it, but not everybody does, unfortunately. But the women were fantastic. They did such a great job, and they just went from strength to strength. And I sit back now and watch the women play at the AFLW level, and I think they're amazing. They had and women's sport, and we know with the soccer what's happened with the Matildas, is it's just a big ticket item these days. They play slightly different. There's no malice. There's no racial abuse and those sorts of things happening and hits behind the play. They play on skill level only, and they are fantastic athletes.
And the standard is really increasing, isn't it?
Every year gets better and better. Amazing. Actually, I'll just quickly tell you, we when women started calling the footy on radio, I remember the first time we played it in Darwin was a woman was calling the game. We got calls from people saying, men in particular, who were not happy with it. Well, the majority of people were, but some men were not, and they were saying things like, it reminds me of when my wife yells at me, when I hear a woman's voice, which was all petty stuff, but they're brilliant callers now, And Kelly Underwood does a great job, she works with the ABC, and she does a great job.
And the AFL, so Darwin or the Territory, I think, secured was it the AFLW Dreamtime game?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I know what might happen here. The game is scheduled to be played in Darwin, but there is a move happening to play it somewhere else, and that might be at Uluru.
Oh, wow.
So so we're going to talk to the sport minister on the weekend about that, and whether that's a fact.
That would be quite the backdrop, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it be something?
Do they have
Darwin would have to give it up. That would be one of the things that would get in the way, of course, because Darwin would want to promote women's footy, and they're doing such a great job with women's footy now. But
do they have an oval down there? Do they have footy infrastructure?
Well, I think they just had 140 Aboriginal women playing a carnival down there a month or two ago. Down there. So.
Oh wow.
So anyway, we'll have to see where that all goes.
Just staying with the fairer sex, but on a more serious note, something that's quite close to your heart, the No More initiative.
Yeah.
Are you able to tell us a little bit about that and how it came about?
Sure, can tell you the background. 2006, I was asked by Correctional Services, who I wasn't working for but who I had worked for in a previous life, whether I'd travel around the Northern Territory and talk to men about pornography. Did they understand the classifications and how much pornography was there being, passed around in the community? And so I thought about it for a while and then thought, well, why not, because I was always worried about family violence as well. And so I said to them, I'll be happy to do it, but I want to talk to them about family violence as well. And so when that opportunity came, I travelled around and they knew me because I'd been calling the footy on telly, so they'd just turn up thinking we'd talk about footy, and we would. We'd talk for 2 hours if we had to about footy, and then I'd say to them, well, what about pornography? Where's that all come from? And this was prior to the intervention, and they'd say, well, we don't own pornography. We couldn't afford to buy it. They tell us it costs $60 for a video, whatever.
Right. Yep.
Which made sense to me, and I thought, well, that's fine. And then those blue signs went up on those communities where pornography was unlawful. Like, I'm thinking, well, what's that's not even. It's not even got nothing to do with anything. Like, why are you doing that to communities?
Yeah.
They felt great shame with those people on those communities to have that blue sign that said pornography was banned, and so they grew tired of it, and they spoke out very strongly about it. Men did, saying that it was damaging and it wasn't true and whatever. That the pornography wasn't theirs; it was always belonged to people who were tradies who come out to do jobs out there would leave it behind. That's the only way they'd get it. And they made an interesting comment. They said, and this is coming from Canberra, is it not? And I said, yeah, well, it is. Canberra doesn't like you to have pornography. And they said, how come when they have 8 sex shops who actually produce pornography, why don't they deal with that? It's that sort of thing that riles people up.
Hypocrisy. And
yeah. So I talked about that with them, but then I talked about family violence as well.
Okay.
And I knew, this was in 2006, I knew there were 500,000 people who became victims of family violence every year.
Wow.
500,000. So I said that to a group of Walpuri men at Yuendamu.
Yep.
And on Jackamurra Nelson, I call him Jackamurra because he's passed away. Jackamurra Nelson was a forward-thinking, great leader of the Walpuri people. I said that to them. I said, 500,000. I said, you know what? That's one every minute. I said, if you play football for 60 minutes, by the time you finish, 60 more victims of family violence. And he got up and he walked across the room and he walked right up in front of my face and he shook his finger in front of my face and he said, no more, no more. And I knew what no more meant. No more meant get rid of it, because I'd often ask if I was looking for some, where's that old fella Harry? Is he still around? He no more, finish. So I knew what they meant. And so I left Yuendamu and went to Yullamu, which is a nearby community. And I had the similar group of men, Walpuri men as well, and an old man called Ned Hargraves. He's still alive, he's still there. And so I said, you know what, at Yuendamu, those men said no more to family violence. What do you think? And he said, I think all men should link up. And so that's where it started. I'm driving back to Alice Springs and I'm thinking, no more link up. Why can't we link up our elbows? Why can't we link up our elbows to show symbolic statement that we want the violence to stop?
Yeah.
And that's where it came from. And it's just grown now. It's a national program. And I saw the AFL dedicated one of their rounds just recently where players linked up. But what they did, Stuart, which was wrong, the idea of the linking up is the linking up in the front of the body at the elbows with no fists, not around the shoulders like they actually did in the AFL matches, where they linked around just arms around the shoulders.
Okay.
And the reason that is to show the arms and the hands that do the damage in violence, that is locked. You're looking at it locked up, and the men can't do it. They're saying we're locked. That's why that should be there.
Right.
And had they have rung me up and talked to me about it, which they didn't, I mean, I knew they were doing it, and they told me they were linking up, and I thought, well, that's good, they'll do the frontal one.
Yep.
But they didn't, and so that was disappointing because I think men were offended with that because it's meant to be a stronger statement than just put your arms around somebody's shoulders.
Yep.
And that's disappointing.
Has the sentiment been pretty similar in most of the communities that you've been around, delivering this message to? Are they all, buying that message that this type of thing has got to stop?
Yeah. There's some misconception that they have many more acts of violence than what happens in the broader community. The broader community has many more people in it, but they know their answers. If they say there's no violence on their community, I know they're lying, and I know the reason they're lying is they're ashamed of it. Mm-hmm. So I want to target that and say you're ashamed of it. Whereas if they say yes to it, that's a good thing too, because it means they know that it happens, and maybe they're willing to do something about it. So I have an idea to go forward in this. There's a big conference on in Alice Springs which I can't get to, but I have a 10-point plan to engage with Aboriginal communities to deal with family violence.
Okay.
So and the idea of it is to engage to empower. That's what I'm calling it, engage to empower. So work with the community about what do they feel about family violence? Do they want to do something about it? Yes, they do. What would you want to do about it? Blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Who should do it? And give the responsibility clearly back to them. But the workers have to have real jobs on those communities to deal specifically with family violence. Mm-hmm. That would be their job. And so if you were to identify 10 communities, for instance, and talk to them about it, and get them to come on board with it. That could be 20 people you'd employ, because in most communities would want a man and a woman to work together on it. But make them real jobs. Make them real jobs, and then we would bring them into town. We'd train them centrally. We'd have centralised training for them in Darwin, and we'd go out in bush and train them on their communities as well, but in groups, and let them come up with ideas. And the reason I think this could work is because many years ago when I visited Groote Island, and I spoke to them about an issue they had. Kids weren't going to school, and I was trying to think what could be done to get the kids to go to school. What sort of incentive could we get? And they said to me, well, a lot of people come up with ideas, but none of them work. But we have ideas of our own. And I said, okay, what? And they said, well, we won't tell you now, but when you come back, we'll tell you, because they want me to come back.
Okay.
And so when I went back, or when I left, they walked me to the airport and they said, oh, can you buy us a megaphone? I said, yeah, I'll get you a megaphone, no worries. I was thinking they're going to use it at the footy or, for crowd control or whatever.
Yep.
So I bought them a megaphone and I took it out and gave it to them. And what their idea was to get the most senior person in their tribe to actually walk around with the megaphone in the morning and find the kids that aren't going to school and get into them and give them a hard time. And that's what they were doing. Old man Jimana Lalara was a senior man, and he would be on the megaphone. He'd say, I can see you, Lalara kids behind the tree, you damn will get to school. And it made such a difference.
Yeah.
But not for me to have suggested such a thing to them. So what we have to do is trust them to come up with the idea of what works to stop the violence.
Yep.
And one of the things that's very clear to me is pride in the tribe. We have to stop calling Aboriginal people Aboriginal.
Okay.
Like when we talk specifically about a group,
right,
from a particular community, identify them by their tribes. Let them feel proud of who they are. It's like having Europeans called for Germans and Italians and Greeks. You say, you're European? No, I'm Greek.
Yep.
They're Greeks, that's who they are.
Yep.
So pride in the tribe. You are Walpri, you are Gurindji, you are Aranda, you're Larrakia, you're Tiwi, you're whatever you are, because I think people hide behind Aboriginal or First Nation or
it's too broad.
Indigenous. Yeah, it's not that. You are your tribe. 60,000 years of history with those tribes. This may let them reconnect back tribally with each other, not try to be something other than a Gurindji person or a Walpri person. Be that. So I'm doing some work in the prisons at the moment, talking to men about these sorts of issues, and I'm getting them to introduce themselves, and with women as well, introduce themselves by their name and their tribe, and say it confidently. Be proud of who you are. And you would not believe the different tribal names there are. There's so many more than, I think we think there's 250 tribes. There's more than that.
Right.
There's more than that. There's smaller tribes and bigger tribes and whatever. But I think pride in the tribe is the way to go. So from now on, when we talk to people, we can say, you're a Warlpiri man, proud history, and talk about your history and what happened when colonisation happened and what about the massacres, and have those whole open discussions. They are what they are. They should not be ignored or even forgotten. They need to be spoken about. And I just think there is something in being proud of who you are, clearly who you are, that'll make a difference in the way in which they go about business.
You mentioned before about giving people, good jobs to deal with the DV side of things. Do you think that that's a large contributing factor? Is that the lack of opportunity contributes to something like family violence?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you can't jump in a Toyota and drive 12 hours somewhere to Lake Nash to talk to them about family violence and then jump in the car and drive back again and hope that everything's going to...
Yep.
That's not how it works. You've got to have workers based on the community doing that work.
Yep.
And they'll be answerable to their own community, And the community, my model for the 10-point plan is have them to answer back to their own community, because there is a rising of women in Aboriginal communities. They're more powerful now than they've ever been, and they'll continue to grow and get more powerful. So whoever's doing that work on that community, let's say it's Kalkarinji for the Grinji people, they would report to the to the group that runs the community. That's who they answer to.
Right.
And I don't care what they want to do. And I know in the past we've tried this and said, when we're working with communities, say, well, what's your biggest problem? And they'd say, well, the biggest problem is people booking flights on the plane and not turning up, and then we have to pay for it. So, all right, well, what can you do about that? And help them come up with a plan to do something about it.
Yep.
And so one of the things in that particular case, they said they'll pay a deposit. So you pay your deposit, you're more likely to... Those things can happen.
Yep.
But it's owned by them, not owned by us. And so I'm bothered that we see ourselves as being on their community, telling them what to do. Those days are over.
Okay.
Now's the empowerment time.
Yep.
This is the century of empowerment coming up. They will rise. I mean, Aboriginal people cop such an embarrassing deal in the referendum, and they still haven't really come to grips with that. The fellow Australians have said no to them having any special rights in this country.
Yep.
But they stand tall and proud now, and you mentioned talking to some of the young Aboriginal people like Jade, was here talking to you. This is the next generation. They are not going to want to hear truth-telling. You know why? Because they'll already know. Because they have social media, they're on there, they can check everything out.
Yep.
They know where it is. And they'll learn quicker now than they've ever in the past. And now why don't we trust? Element of trust is required. I want to see it happen. I want to see communities be identified as whatever that tribal group is. So the Gurindji people from Kalkarinji and Dagaragu say this about family violence. The Warlpiri people from Lajamanu say this, and from Yundama and whatever. But I think that's where the answer lies. Empowerment has to come, but you have to engage to empower.
Yep. You mentioned 500,000 victims before. Are they mainly women and children?
Oh, absolutely, mainly women and children. And I know men always say, well, men get beaten up too, and they do. There's no doubt. But you know what? It's much, much higher. And women die. Women are getting killed. I can't believe it. I can't listen to the radio anymore. I can't watch TV anymore. I've got to find something else to get my information from, because it's the same stuff. It just... It's it's heartbreaking.
And so is there no more initiative? I mean, it probably doesn't just focus on men, but is there more a focus on young men or men in general as the perpetrators, and how we can reach the men to prevent them from inflicting these sorts of violence on them?
It's a good point, but I think if we give ownership to the communities, that's their job to work out. Like We make the decision that we're not going to go to a community and do a presentation in the schools about family violence because it might cause trauma to the kids when they go home, and if they're wearing a no more band on their hand and their father's the perpetrator, they go home and then he beats them up, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So we don't do that. But they can make a decision about that. Mm-hmm. What age group do they want to talk to their kids about family violence, and who should do it, and what should they say? That's their business. Yep. We just back them. We back them 100%. You do it the way you want to do it. We'll offer some guiding comments, but it's your call. So if you want young people to be more empowered, we'll start doing something about it. Because if they say, well, we want to empower young people to do something about family violence, okay, what is it they should be doing? What are you aiming for?
Yep.
Well, we want to reduce family violence. What are some of the ideas that you have to do that?
Yep.
And who will do it? And how will they do it? And what support do they need? Make it an important job on the community. You know, just like, I mean, in some ways a bit like the police or something. They can dress as a family violence worker, you know, whatever.
Yep.
Whatever. Anyway, I'm feeling a bit buoyed about it.
Okay.
I'm hoping that there's going to be support for the idea of pride in the tribe.
Yep.
And engaging to empower.
And has sport been a good way, you know, a good vehicle to deliver that message, you know?
Well, it does. I mean, it does a great job, but at the same time it causes some problems as well. Now, a couple of the communities that had real problems, which have been around, you know, a visiting team comes and plays the home team, and the home team doesn't win, and then they riot,
Yep.
and then fights start. You know, like, so there's that element that still has to happen.
Yep.
But the good thing is, women are getting involved more and more with the sport.
Yep.
But I've got to say this, Stuart, footy itself is not going to be the answer.
Mm.
It will not be the answer at all. What communities need to be thinking about, what other sports should their kids get the opportunity to play?
Yep.
Why can't they look at the Matildas, those young girls, and say, that's me. Lydia Williams has just retired as the goalkeeper. She's an Indigenous woman.
Right.
I want to talk to her. I want to talk to her and say, how can we engage with you to talk to communities about teaching young girls to play like the Matildas?
Yep.
You know, or play whatever sport.
Has there been other sports that have taken up the no more, you know, directive?
Oh yeah, I mean
outside of Aussie rules.
Well, we have the thing we call a DVAP, a Domestic Violence Action Plan,
Okay.
which is a plan that the club writes out itself. It says this is our position on family violence.
Yep.
Like, we have zero tolerance to it. This is the steps we're going to take. But the problem with it is they need to be able to live by that. Like, it needs to be written in their constitution that every time they have a meeting, that's on the agenda. That's a standing agenda, because in the plan it says who's going to do what. Mm-hmm. So you bring it up every time, and they'd meet monthly probably, sit down and say, okay, we said we're going to do it, how are we going with that?
Yep.
You know, that's that sort of things, the checks and balance thing.
Yep.
But the ownership, but it needs it at club level, but it needs it at code level as well.
Yep.
So NT Cricket need to have a DVAP that says this is the support we will give our clubs to deal with family violence. And then the clubs write their plan about this is our club plan with family violence.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
That's the way to go, and we're doing lots of work trying to make that happen.
Okay. Have you had any buy-in from, you know, current governments or, you know, councils to, you know, I guess sponsor or, you know, get behind these sorts of initiatives as well?
Well, that big conference is on in Alice Springs. I'm hoping that the discussion I'm having with you might be raised down there, and I should be there, but I just can't get there. Hopefully it'll come from there. But we did I gave evidence to the inquest of those 5 women who were murdered, and I outlined those 10 points on how to engage to empower.
Yep.
And the coroner thanked me for it and said she will include it in her report. That's due out soon. Yep. I'm hoping when it does come out, that will be something that people will latch onto, and I want to meet with government about that. I'll wait until after the election and meet with the new government if there's a new government, or the old government if they're still in, and talk to them, saying now's the time to do something here to empower Aboriginal people. That's what's missing, Stu.
Yep.
That's what's missing, the empowerment. people hold on. It's all about them, because the whole industry is built around them having a Toyota to drive out there, and you could spend 6 hours driving and then spend 2 hours on the community and 6 hours back. Like, what's the point in that?
Yep.
If you have someone there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's going to make the difference. Anyway, we're hoping that things will happen.
Well, speaking of the election, have you seen any kind of policy from any of the political parties that are going to empower Indigenous people? Have you seen it? Are you following any of?
Well, a lot of it happens behind closed doors. You know, we don't know. I mean, because obviously what they want to do in the lead up to the election is they want to make an announcement.
Yep.
And so they're probably figuring out. I mean, this might even be something they'll come up with, because I've certainly may let them know.
Yep.
This engage to empowerment thing. Maybe they'll come up with something. Maybe because if one party does it, then the other party has to do it well, or do it better. So I'm hoping that's going to happen. But I'm going to meet with the minister on the weekend to have a bit of a chat. I won't say which minister, but I'm going to have a bit of a chat about how we can get that message out there.
Well, that's good. That communication is underway.
Yeah.
And how do you see things playing out in the August general election? Do you have an opinion either way, or just whatever will be, will be? Yeah,
I think, what I was a little bit sort of pleased about the same time I was a bit disappointed about, is that every time an election is on, there's two key issues that they focus on.
Yep.
One is juvenile crime and one is itinerance.
Right.
So they've exhausted themselves with the juvenile crime stuff, but they haven't yet really got their teeth into itinerance.
Okay.
But that will come before the election. There's no doubt about that. And what's sad about that is, both parties then work on who can do the worst in those areas.
Right.
In order to make it an issue. Like we will lock them up, or something comes out of it. There's sort of ridiculous comments in that. And the media's at fault as well for, instead of calling them out and saying, we don't want to hear about, you will lock them up.
Yep.
Look, I mean, I don't understand why we would build a new prison for women. Like, I mean, I know why that message is there, because it's to satisfy everyone that, the party's doing something.
Yep.
It has to be tangible so that they can see it. But, I mean, I was talking to some of the women in prison the other day. Do you know what they said to me? They said to me, why are they talking about a new prison? We got a prison. Why aren't we spending... This is them saying to me, not me saying to them.
Yep.
They're saying, why aren't we spending that money on preventative programs?
Yep.
Now, they know that. Like, the women know that,
Rehabilitation and things like that, yeah.
And, I mean, anyway, the prisons have been good, I must say. I've been doing some good work with them, and we'll continue to do that.
Yep.
None of this is funded, by the way.
Right.
But maybe it will be after the election. Maybe they'll see that that's another area of work that needs to be done.
Yeah. So at the end of our podcast, we give our guests an opportunity to just promote any initiatives that they've got going on. I'm assuming you'd like to give a bit of a mention to the No More initiative. How can people get behind it? What can they do? Yeah,
go online and you can register there, become a supporter of the No More campaign program.
Yep.
Whatever you want to call it. We desperately need people to help us raise some funds because we don't get government funding.
Okay.
We do, but it's not enough to do what is standard business for us now.
Yep.
Without thinking about the engagement to empower work. So just get involved there, and if we can get money from people helping us do the work we want to do, we'll be very pleased. And of course, you don't have to pay to be a member. Just show your support.
Yep.
Go on board. And can I just quickly finish by saying,
please,
I've had a meeting with Convat Scarlett, the Lord Mayor, and with the Lord Mayor of Palmerston, and I want to see if we could do some footpath signage where we could paint messages on footpaths that are permanent, and they could say, be a supporter of no more violence or something simple like that.
Yep.
And we want to do it in like maybe on the Nightcliff foreshore,
Yep.
or wherever there's high pedestrian
traffic.
traffic. Yeah,
Sure.
that goes. Put it there and see how we go.
All right, well, Charlie King, mate, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us, and best of luck with the No More initiative and the commentating and everything else you've got going on, mate. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation. Cheers.
Thanks, mate.